Good evening, everyone, and good day to all those who are in Shekhar, who's joining us from Netherlands, and everyone from the UK. It's really good to have you here and to see all your faces. It's always, it's good to know that you all are safe and well during this time. Just to introduce, before I introduce what we are going to do today, just a few basic rules for the evening. If you keep your mics muted till we start the Q&A, that'll be really helpful. When the Q&A happens, at the bottom of your screen, there's a participant tab. If you click on that, there's a button to raise your hand, and we get notified who has raised the hands. We can call your name, you can unmute and ask questions. Alternately, you can ask on the chat as well. So moving on to this concept of tales from the bush. This is a sort of storytelling session that we have where our naturalists talk about the species at the lodge. And since the lodge is temporarily closed down, we are doing this virtually. And to make it more and more interesting, we are getting some experts on the field. So today we have very interesting two people. One is Kartikeya Singh Chauhan, who's a guru to Reni Pani almost. He's been training. Is coming back to introducing the guests over here. Kartikeya Singh Chauhan, who's a guru to Reni Pani in one sense. He's been a naturalist trainer, for the last 5 to 6 years. He's one of the leading wildlife naturalists in the country also, and was awarded the inaugural Toft Lodge Naturalist of the Year in 2010. He's got a research background in wolves and lions, and in that experience, he became a professional carnivore trapper, and later on, got involved in capturing herbivores as well, and was one of the team members in the groundbreaking Gore reintroduction, which happened from Kana to Bandhavgarh. We've also got Dr. Shekhar Kolipaka from Netherlands. He's a practicing conservation researcher and a consultant, and he's a well-renowned wildlife and social scientist. Most notably, he's done work in Panna, where he played a very crucial role in dealing with the human aspect of the famous Panna tiger reintroduction program. So both of them will talk a little bit about what they have done in the past. So the topic of translocations and reintroductions itself, after the initial learnings in Madhya Pradesh, the forest department has been doing a fair bit of using these conservation tools of translocations and reintroductions. And what got me interested in this is also that in Satpura, over the last 10 years, we witnessed, the reintroduction of Barasinga, which our company also got involved in to help out the forest department. And that was has been a successful program where they introduced 24 hard ground Barasinga, which were only found in Kana earlier, and then reintroduced to the Satpura landscape. From 24, it's become 100 now. And obviously, it's helped in many ways, especially to protect them from outbreak of disease and to diversify the gene pool. The forest department is also planning a lot of translocation of spotted deer from Panna, not Panna, Page to Satpura to improve the prey base here. So those sort of exercises are ongoing. And then we've also seen a lot of tigers being translocated to this landscape. So Satpura has a slightly lower density of tigers, and a lot of times we see it's a mixed bag, almost a double-edged sword, where there have been some very, very successful translocations where orphaned cubs from Bandhavgarh have been moved to Satpura and, settled here and become breeding individuals also. But there's also been cases where there are kind of problem animals which are in conflict with humans in other landscapes which have been translocated here. and in fact the problem is just moved from one landscape to the other, and they start doing the same thing in Satpura, and some of them have ended up in captivity after that. So what we can do to mitigate these problems, like I travel quite a lot to Ladakh, and there with the snow leopards they don't follow so much of this translocation activity, but they actually sort of mitigate the conflict by having low impact tourism over there, homestays which are being developed. The snow leopard conservancy protects the livestock, makes sheds so that the snow leopard can't attack, and they have a good compensation program which mitigates these sort of, dispute conflicts. So either way, these tools basically have three main steps that need to be followed in a translocation program. One is the need to establish a need. Two is to actually capture the animal, and three is the release and the release of the animal to the new landscape. So step one and three in a country like India, where there's a lot of human population, involves a lot of human aspect in it, where Shekhar is very proficient in this field. And step two involves a lot of technology,
Delay.
know-how, capabilities, veterinary medicine, etc., which Kartikeya has a great grasp of this. So these two experts will kind of, capture the whole gamut of the exercises that go in, through these processes. So without much delay, I'll just call upon Kartikeya now to talk a bit about translocation and reintroduction and his specific role in the projects that were undertaken some time ago. Over to you, Kartikeya.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ali, for a nice introduction. Um, so, without going much into technical details, in simple terms, I will explain you the difference between reintroductions and translocations. So, reintroduction is basically a reversal of local extinction of a species to enhance the long-term survival of the species in a particular area of importance. So, for example, the tigers which were brought into Panna after they got extinct in Panna, or gaur which were brought into Bandhavgarh after they got extinct in Bandhavgarh, both these projects are excellent example of reintroduction of locally extinct species. Both the species used to exist in these areas in the past, and there are various reasons for their local extinctions, and I won't go into much detail here. Maybe if you have questions, we can always answer those questions, but they got extinct due to certain reasons, and then they were brought back to their original home. Now coming to translocations, in very simple terms, it's movement of animals, wild animals, from place A to place B for either conservation or management purposes. So, for example, Satpura Tiger Reserve is wonderful tiger habitat, but owing to very low density of prey in Satpura, the tiger numbers are also very low. So Madhya Pradesh Forest Department undertook a movement of Cheetah from Pench to Satpura to augment the prey and increase the prey base for tigers in Satpura, so that better the prey, there will be more tigers. Similarly, I also got a chance to get involved with capture and translocation of another ungulate called Nilgai, which is a large antelope. And here the situation was completely different. They were in completely human dominated landscape, not inside a protected area, where they were damaging crops and causing a lot of damage to agricultural produce. So the capture and movement of these animals was more for the wildlife conflict management rather than conservation. Now, coming down back to gaur translocation project, I got a chance to contribute to reversal of local extinction of gaur in Bandhavgarh. And this project was conducted by Madhya Pradesh Forest Department in association with a company that I was working for, Taj Safaris, which was in partnership with a South African company called And Beyond, which was earlier known as CC Africa, and Wildlife Institute of India. where 50 animals, 50 gaur were caught from Kana and brought to Bandhavgarh. Now, gaur used to exist in Bandhavgarh till 1998, but they locally got extinct due to certain reasons. And 50 animals were brought back to Bandhavgarh from Kana in 2011 and 12. And the population has seen more than 300% increase in last 7 years, which means from 50 they have grown to more than 150 animals in last 6-7 years. And it is believed to be one of the most successful large herbivore reintroductions in the country, and also a very fine because both the agencies Taj Safaris and Beyond contributed financially as well as technically in making this program a success. So Ali, may I request you to play a short video of the Gaur reintroduction program, which was made by And Beyond at that time, to get an idea of what it involves, especially when I say that animals were moved from one place to another, and then we can go forward from there.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen. Is it visible clearly?
For 20 years, And Beyond has been at the forefront of conservation management. In the process, we've developed a working model that has impacted positively wherever it's implemented.
And that's the success of And Beyond's model, in my view, is that we've able to fight above our weight class in every area that we've operated in. We've changed the way tourism development has happened in Tanzania. We've improved and raised the bar in every reserve that we're operating, in every country that we operate in.
But until recently, our reach was confined to Africa. In 2006, And Beyond India was launched, and the scene was set for a momentous change in the way conservation is managed in the country.
And Beyond has this incredible model that we take into India. And in our engagement with the Forest Department in India, we discovered that they've got local extinctions in some of the parks, and no technology or means to be able to reverse those local extinctions. And what we've got in Africa, of course, is vast experience in reversing local extinctions. So immediately there was an opportunity for us to get together and bring this African expertise into the Indian conservation situation.
Listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List, gal populations in the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve ceased to exist in the 90s. Why? No one knows for sure. So we joined forces with the Indian wildlife authorities, and the reintroduction of the species became our first big management project together. But while game capture and translocation is common practice and a fundamental element of conservation management in Africa, for our Indian counterparts, the notion of catching and moving 50 gal was unimaginable.
So we engaged with the park officials. They sent a group over to Africa where we exposed them to African active management processes in the Kruger National Park, in Klisuyu and Mfolozi, and at Pinda and beyond Pinda. So we got private sector, provincial conservation and national conservation exposure for the group. And this set the ground for the development of a conservation team, or an active management team, a translocation team in Madhya Pradesh Forest Department.
5 years of negotiation, training and intense preparation later, Operation Gal was given the go-ahead, and our team flew over to India to kickstart the mission.
So we arrived in India about 2 weeks before the operation was due to start, and the main reason for that was to check that all the equipment was ready. Remember, this has never been done before in India. The equipment was new. It was built in India and by Indians who didn't understand what they were trying to build it for. They'd never seen it done.
Building specialized trucks and importing Schedule 7 drugs like M99 and the darts needed to immobilize the animals were only a few of the many finer details they had to pay careful attention to.
The ground teams had a briefing on exactly what to expect, and then most importantly, the practical understanding of each person's role in the team as we get close to the truck and from when we get close to the animal. We then rehearsed and practiced with the stretcher teams, got them to understand how to carry 700 kilograms of sand. When we got to 800 kilograms, the poles started bending, and we realized we're only going to be able to carry big females and males of that size.
Despite careful planning and intense briefing, Les was still worried that things could go wrong.
When you're sitting with a team of 60 people at a capture operation, and this in itself was completely foreign to Dave, Jeff and myself, and it was a real mission to try and manage the 60 people to make sure that their presence wasn't going to impact on the potential of the operation. Whenever you have lots of people around a capture operation, the risks increase. People get in the way, animals get stopped, things get forgotten, people end up talking where they shouldn't be, which completely can derail the whole operation.
But despite the potential dangers and the problems they were facing, the team was in good spirits, and light-hearted banter peppered the briefing sessions.
We're sitting in our first briefing the night before the operation, and Dr. Pavla, the Chief Conservative Wildlife for Madhya Pradesh, said, "Gentlemen, I just want to remind you that we have had outside specialists here before, and they have darted our ungulates before to teach us how to do it, and all the animals died. So no pressure." So this was the day before we were about to start. So we all felt immense pressure on the morning of the operation to make sure that we had absolutely covered every one of our bases properly, reduced every risk as much as we possibly could, and then had to rely on our experience to make sure that we could make it fly.
Les was confident they'd done all they could to prepare, and it was time to get started. In Africa, we often use helicopters to locate and herd animals in a game capture operation. But in India, things work slightly differently.
The helicopters in an Indian capture operation are the 9 elephants. And capturing operations in India can only happen if you have elephants. We discovered that as we went. They can get in between the trees, they can get into the dongas, they're permanent 4-wheel drive, and they provide you with a mobility that we just don't have in Africa. So the warden got on his radio and called the elephant team that was out looking for the guy. They found the guy and then herded them with elephants out of the hills into the plains amongst the salt forests that we could operate in with the elephants. And they brought them with the first capture operation within 500 meters of the boma, which was absolutely unbelievable.
But before the darting could take place, the Indian vets had to first learn how to judge the correct dosage of drugs.
Initially we were put on the elephants to help assess the size of the animals and start the process of teaching people to judge the dosage that would be required. But trying to judge that's not so easy, so it takes a bit of experience. So we had Dr. Dave Cooper from KZN Wildlife and Jeff Cook sitting on the elephants giving their opinion of what the weight of the animal was. I was giving my opinion. We had the field directors giving their opinions, and then in the middle of the 5 or 6 opinions we'd agree more or less what we thought the weight was, and that would be the dose.
With everyone agreed, it was time to get to work.
The animal was pointed with a laser, green laser pointer, to make sure we all understood we were darting the same animal. Then the dart was loaded and the animal was darted by the local vets. We'd done the training with the local vets. They put in all the darts. During the whole operation, we put in 54 darts and not one single dart missed its target, which was absolutely unbelievable. So the Indian vets put the first dart in, all of us got our stopwatches going, and then we sat and waited, because this has never been done before with these drugs and these animals before. And exactly as per our predictions, at 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes, we had really good signs. The animal started high stepping. At 5 minutes, the animal's back legs started going, and at 7 minutes, the animal was down.
But as with any live operation, things can go wrong in a split second.
And we watched in absolute horror as the first animal went down on a steep slope heading towards a nala, which is a little drainage line. Slowly slid forward into the nala and onto its side, which is the worst situation you want for a drugged animal to be in, especially a ruminant.
But the African team's expertise saved the day, as Les quickly took control of the operation and got the team to roll the animal onto its chest. Yet they were immediately faced with another problem, one which every game capturer faces regularly.
That we couldn't get the stretcher in next to that animal. So the team got the first taste of putting a rope around an animal's horns and dragging it to somewhere where you could work with it.
The experience was a good lesson for the Indian team to learn early on. Quickly and efficiently, they managed to move the animal onto the stretcher and get it into the recovery vehicle. For their first ever capture operation, things were going really well.
That whole operation for the first Gar dart in India, I think took 22 minutes or 23 minutes. We'll have to check the records, but it was still phenomenally quick. And the speed at which the operation took place improved with every animal that we did. and the amount of participation that we had as an expert team from South Africa got less and less with every animal that we did.
The Indian team's dedication to the operation and learning these new methods ensured the capture and translocation of the gal was a major success, and proves that the country is well on its way to developing this new form of conservation management.
What amazed me was how the Indian teams all grasped their roles so quickly. At the end of day one, I think we caught 5 animals. We moved the animals from the field into the boma. They were all standing comfortably in the boma. The boma was attached to the loading ramp on the truck. We were ready to load the animals. And I couldn't believe that after 4 or 5 years of planning to get to this point, we actually had our first 5 animals ready to be loaded in the truck and sent to Bandhavgarh National Park. And all of them looked absolutely superb in the bomas.
For and beyond, it's an incredible success story. And it's been an unbelievable privilege to be part of something that's changing the way management is happening on another continent.
And beyond is having a massive impact on Indian conservation development based on our expertise from Africa.
Yeah, Kartikeya, go ahead.
So thank you very much, Ali, for playing that video. So this was a quick, sort of example of reversing the local extinction of Gaur and Bandhavgarh, wherein animals were brought in from Kana and put back into Bandhavgarh. Now, the actual capture process was not more than 7 to 10 days, but it took about 6 years in preparation. So we started in 2006, and the first animal that was caught and moved to Bandhavgarh was in 2011. So you can understand the amount of planning and preparation that goes into all these kind of projects before you actually start moving animals. The second project that I was involved with was the translocation of Nilgai, and this was in a totally different setting. These animals were not inside a national park or a wildlife sanctuary. They were in completely human-dominated landscape where they are damaging crops. They do even today, and the government has not been able to find any solution to it till date. And whenever we go to all these conferences or meetings, the suggestions that come is that why can't we catch them and translocate them? Why can't we sterilize them? And all these suggestions first require us to be able to catch these animals. But since nobody had caught them in big numbers, we set up to demonstrate a technique where these animals can be mass captured without actually tranquilizing these animals, because in Gaur we were looking at a specific number, but here the numbers are massive and large. So Ali, if you could please play a video which shows how we caught Nilgai from completely human-dominated landscapes with the help of horses and helicopters, and brought them into captivity, and then later on moved them to a nearby sanctuary called Gandhi Sagar Wildlife Sanctuary, and then I can further talk about it once the video is done.
अफ्रीका में मास कैप्चर पद्धति में हेलीकॉप्टर उपयोग करने का उन्हें बहुत लंबा अनुभव है, और इसलिए वे केवल हेलीकॉप्टर की मदद से ही जानवरों को हाँकते हुए बोमा के भीतर ले आते हैं। लेकिन भारत में हमारे लिए ये अपने तरह का पहला अनुभव था, और इसीलिए हमने हेलीकॉप्टरों के साथ सीमित मात्रा में आदमियों को और कुछ घोड़ों को भी लिया। और इस बार फिर हमने कोशिश की, जब पहले 3, 4 या 5 किलोमीटर तक दूर जा चुके रोजड़ों को भी हेलीकॉप्टर की मदद से हाका करते हुए बोमा के भीतर लाया गया। और जैसे ही रोजड़े बोमा के भीतर आए, पहले आजमाई हुई पद्धति के अनुरूप आदमी और घोड़े उनके पीछे लग गए और उन्हें हाँकते हुए वो पर्दों के भीतर ले आए।
रोजड़ों का जो समूह बोमा में आ गया था, उस पर घुड़सवारों, ग्रामीणों और हेलीकॉप्टर से इतना दबाव बनाया गया कि वे आगे भागते हुए चले गए। बीच में लगाए गए पर्दों के गेट पर तैनात टीम ने हाथ आया मौका नहीं जाने दिया और एक एक करके चारों पर्दे बंद कर दिए। इन मनोवैज्ञानिक बाधाओं से घबराकर भागते हुए रोजड़े आखिर व्हील गेट को पार कर गए और उसे भी बंद कर दिया गया।
Request you also to translate that because it's in Hindi. So if you can explain what happened there and then go ahead with.
Yeah, exactly. Since the narration of the video was in Hindi, I'll explain you. So we actually constructed a very long funnel shape boma with the walls on the side of that funnel were about 10 to 12 feet high, and it's a V-shape funnel which finally ends into a steel section with a loading ramp and a truck. So people, with the help of horses and helicopters, they round the Nilgai in the landscape, and they try to chase them towards the boma. And when these animals cross a certain section of the boma, the curtains behind these animals are pulled, and the animals keep moving forward, thinking that all these curtains are actually very strong physical barriers which they cannot negotiate. And eventually they end up into a steel section, and the gates are closed. And from there they cannot escape, and they are slowly, uh, uh, pushed into trucks and then moved. So this technique doesn't involve any drugs, tranquilizing of animals or anything of that sort. It's a technique where you just round the animals from the field, bring them straight into the trucks, and take them wherever you would want to take them. And this particular project was, it's not the final solution, but it's a step towards trying to find solution of problem animals in our country which are damaging, crops in large numbers. So I won't say that this is the solution for the problems that we are facing with Nilgai, but definitely it's a step towards trying to solve the problems. Let's say if we want to, move them to certain areas where they can be better off without damaging crops, or they can be sterilized or whatever, because government doesn't want to kill them. Now, in these two videos, you've seen the actual, the fancy part of reintroductions and translocations. But, and I would say that this is the easier part of reintroductions and translocations. The more difficult part of reintroductions and translocations is to deal with people, because animals that we are catching, they never question why are we being caught or why are we being moved. But in landscapes where they are moved, especially if these landscapes are, outside protected areas, or if you are moving large carnivores which are capable of causing, damage to life and livestock, there is many a times opposition from the locals. And that's where my colleague Shekhar Kolipaka, comes in, and he does the difficult work of working with people and convincing them that the translocations and reintroductions are good for them, and also trying to solve problems after these animals are moved into these landscapes. So I think I'm going to hand over the baton to Shekhar now, and let's hear his part of the story, and then we can come back to the question and answer sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kartikeya. It was these videos were fascinating. I mean, like we've seen, the people in the videos in the background commentary, they were talking about the complications with people. The people dimension, like you exactly mentioned, is while the animals is one side of the coin, the human side is the other side of the coin. So unless the human side and the animal side are not managed well, the reintroduction is never successful, especially in countries like India. You must have also seen, you must have heard how surprised the Africans were when they saw these numbers of people who are involved in these introductions, like 60, 70 people, when you're supposed to be in absolute quietness and silence. But that is India. India is 10 times smaller than the continent of Africa, but it has more people than the whole continent of Africa. So the people dimension is absolutely staggering here. These reintroduction and translocation projects have typically 3 phases. One is the pre-project phase, before the planning that goes into these and before these animals come into a location, and the implementation of the reintroduction or the translocation phase, and then the post-project phase. So in all these 3 phases, the human dimension aspects or the people aspects have to be very, very well understood. Otherwise, it could lead to a lot of dangerous situations and create complications for people who are managing these projects. I was part of the Panna Tiger Reintroduction program, and I would like to share with you some insights from this program about the human side of the reintroductions and some of the things which really fascinated me in that process as I tried to solve the problems. So in one story, when the I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this program or not, but Panna is Panna National Park is a national park in the north of Madhya Pradesh, about 500 kilometers from Satpura, and tigers were reintroduced there in the year 2009. So tigers from other parks like Bandhavgarh, Kanha were brought in, and then were reintroduced, and slowly the population was built up. Ali, could you just show the first picture, please?
Sure.
So, in areas where, in an area like Panna, humans and animals have always shared spaces. So, for example, in these areas, this is a typical a photograph of a leopard, which people worship. Similarly, they worship tigers. They worship so many other animals. The local population, the local tribes and non-tribes, the very rural populations, they have a very intimate connection with animals, and in fact, this is a very spiritual connection. They treat these animals as spirit protectors. So I was in Panna for a long time, and then when I started working with, I started hearing these expressions from local people that as the tigers disappeared from there was a sense of loss within local populations, that their spirit from the forest is just disappearing. So their protector was just going away. And when the local population heard that new tigers were being brought in to this landscape, there was also a sense of worry between the rural people, because to ensure protection of tigers and their livestock, and to make sure that these tigers don't harm their livestock, people actually make pacts with these spirit tigers or the forest. So that you have a shaman, and then you have a whole ceremony that is conducted, and then people make offerings, and then they make a pact with the spirit tiger to say that, hey, please don't harm us, and if you don't harm us in this season, then we offer you a gift at the end of it. But these local people did not have any kind of, they were unaware where these tigers were coming from, the new tigers, the reintroduction tigers. And so there was this anxiety that was building up locally as to how these tigers would respond to them and what kind of complications they would create for their livestock. And this they were not able to express to anybody, because the people who were involved in these translocations just did not understand this human dimension of it. And so this pented up anger eventually turned violent, and then it became a huge protest, and thousands of people just got out from the rural areas and then said, we don't want these tigers coming here. But if you don't understand these kind of pre-existing conditions in the situation, in the location, it could always lead to complications. Ali, could you show the other picture, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Shekhar.
Now, this is a rock art that I found in the Panna area. This area is laden with rock art. So there's a huge amount of evidence that people have coexisted with wildlife locally there for thousands and thousands of years. Though I can't tell you how old this is, but it's definitely a few thousand years old. You can see a tiger chasing a group of monkeys. Now, this is a kind of relationship local people had. They had the locals for millennia. They have known their local animals. So the pre-existing conditions are not always conflict-prone conditions, though there were some conflicts. But it is also the people also have a very, very friendly, a positive relationship with the local wildlife. And if you don't know these relationships and the scope of these relationships, the extent of these relationships, you can never deal with the local people, or you end up miscommunicating with them. But that's also the complications in a country like India, where there's so many diverse cultures, so many worldviews, so many such a huge difference in the people. So this was something that was missing in that Panna Tiger Reserve situation, but we kind of acted fast and recorrected it. But then some damage was already done in the starting of the project. So the next stage of the project would typically be the implementation phase. Now, this project had a lot of local resistance from a lot of local people who said, now the tigers are gone, why don't we open up this area for mining? I mean, if you know Panna, they also find diamonds in that area. So there was a bit of pressure from the mining lobbies to open it up. And then people were also wondering, if they've gone for some reason, why should we bring them back? So there was a lot of political resistance as well for bringing these tigers back. But anyway, the tigers were brought in. The government decided, no, we're going to go with the reintroduction. The tigers were brought in. Ali, if you can just show me the other picture. But at the same time, what was also happening was there was a very the local governments where there was a prohibition on cattle being sold to abattoirs or the slaughterhouses. Usually, local people keep a lot of cattle, and these cattle, the unwanted cattle, especially the males, which don't have any function in the fields because people use tractors these days, are all sent away. I mean, both when I say cattle, it's also buffaloes and cows, which are sent away to states of UP and Kanpur, where the skins are used in in the leather industry and so on and so forth. All this came down because of these prohibitions on cattle, and the Panna and the neighboring areas were stacked with cattle, and most of this cattle was abandoned animals, which the locals could not tend to because they could not use them. I mean, old animals, unproductive animals that they could not feed. They were just abandoned, and all these animals were in the forest. And these animals, when they died, of course, the tigers ate them. But how many? I mean, if you have more than 25,000 animals cows in an area, how many cows can the tigers eat? I mean, so these animals died also naturally from disease and age, and like these pigs, you see, which are also prey for so many other carnivores like leopards and wild dogs and tigers, also ate on these carcasses, and there was a huge amount of prey that was readily available throughout the year for all these carnivores. So these conditions were also not known then, that there was the prohibitions were actually helping with the prey. So without knowing these kind of, and this was a very human aspect, because the cattle numbers increased only because of these prohibitions. Otherwise, there was some regulation, and some of these unwanted cattle were actually being sold to the local leather industry. But now that was not happening, so the whole place was full of cattle. So we had to handle this situation, and so there were also. Ali, could you just turn to the next picture, please? So we had to assess: do really people there want to live with tigers like they always do, like before? So we had to do a huge amount of assessment on tigers and humans, and which I actually captured in a book form, which is a long study then, and then eventually this book shows how we actually do it. And then that took about 5 years of time to get all these local stakeholders to a table, to make them realize what was going on and to get their support for the project. But what had happened was, in spite of all this resistance from local groups, the minute you started engaging them and invested in trust building activities, improved communications on the project. I mean, simple things like keep updating the local communities about what is happening with the tigers. Oh, we have new cubs now, and here are photographs of the cubs. Earlier, they were just in the shadow. They just did not know what was happening in the park. They thought the park, there was a lot of secrecy that was going on. Nobody was informing them what was going on. So there was a lot of rumors spreading. But once we cleared that and started sharing information, people became much more open to the project, and in time they started supporting the project. So the resistance was slowly tackled. And then I'll go to the last phase of the project. Ali, if you could just show me that. Now, in this map, you'd see the Panna Tiger Reserve, and then these black dots are radio-collared tigers, and then these tigers started moving in different directions. For example, the tigers started moving towards Bandhavgarh. I have my pointer. They started moving through very, very densely populated human areas where tigers had never been before. And then they started moving, and they started moving into all other directions. Some tigers also started moving towards the west, into areas that we did not know that they would move into. Again, moving through human areas. This was another unforeseen consequence of this tiger introduction program. For example, nobody realized that the tigers would breed so fast. In fact, I mean, they're just like cats. I mean, they're just cats. So every second year they would give litter, and soon there were too many of these tigers there, and then some of them started dispersing into the landscape. But then we had no idea on where they would go, or what kind of impact would they have on local populations there, and whether this can all be managed or not. So this lack of foresight created complications. Ali, next photo, please. And then again, there was a quick amount of learning in this whole process. So we tried to manage the local people. So the animals were allowed to move, and then there were again elephants and people with radio collars following these tigers. And a lot of work went into it to manage these animals. And over a 10-year period, we did not have any casualties in the project. No people dead, or no casualties, no attacks on humans. Eventually, the program became successful in its part one, which was 10 years, and more than 70 cubs were born in that area, and tigers were reestablished. So whether can they really survive outside reserves was another large study that I conducted, and that also came out in the form of a book, which I later published, where the human side was also emphasized. So this is what I wanted to share, that at different stages of the project, you have different complications with people. And these kind of complications come in all kinds of reintroduction and translocation projects. And now, as part of the International Union for Nature Conservation, the IUCN group, I am part of a group of people who provide insights into how to manage translocations, and make sure that the human aspect is also tackled well. I'm happy to take any questions from here on. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Shekhar, for this very interesting, angle to the human aspect. I had a few questions, but I'm going to invite first the audience, since it's already 7:45, I think let's invite some of the questions from the audience, if they have any, questions towards Kartikeya or towards yourself. So, does anyone have questions? Yeah, so the first question is from Aditya Shah, and he's asking, what is your opinion on the reintroduction of cheetah in India?
Well, yeah, that's quite a controversial topic. But personally, if you ask me, in my opinion, I don't see any problem with that. But there can be people with various opinions, and I know definitely there are people who think that it should not be done, and I also know people who think that it should be done. So personally, for me, I don't see why it can't be done.
Hello.
And there's also one more question. There's a question from Jay Velu, is that when you do a translocation, you're actually separating that one individual from its family. How do you handle this? And do you also study their family structure and try to relocate some of their family members also?
That's always a challenge, Ali. Yeah, it's a very good question. But in the case of Gore, we were able to eliminate that completely. In fact, in one situation, we tranquilized a female Gore, and we realized sometime later, a calf came and sat next to her while she was tranquilized, and we could not make out whether she was the mother or some other female from the family. So we decided to revive that animal and let that animal go. But in situations where you are mass capturing animals, we always do not have a choice. Though we try to capture the entire herd, sometimes certain animals, they get scattered and go away. So 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 definitely, there are always challenges with that.
And there's also Amit, I think he's asking Kartikeya question. Uh, does Boma technique, cause stress to animals, and has it ever, in at least in as per your knowledge, has it resulted in death of animals, as such?
There is always a chance of animals dying when you are trying to catch them. In God translocation, we lost one animal because of some drug complications. Fortunately, when we captured Nilgai, we didn't have any dead animals on us, but there's always a possibility of an animal dying when you're trying to catch them. So yes, you have to live with that.
And Hillary is asking a question, either of you can take it. With big cats, like domestic cats, will the relocated animal have a homing instinct? Uh,
Shekhar, would you like to answer that question? Because I think you have better experience, studying.
Well, typically in cats, what we saw was, yes, you don't really call it a really homing instinct, but if you have any experience with any dogs or cats in the past, if you have a domestic, I come from my town Visakhapatnam used to be a bit of a rural countryside once. Now it's all a big megalopolis. But when you had extra dogs, when you had a dog, you had too many pups of a dog. If you just take it away and just leave it away a few kilometers from your house, a few days later you would realize that the dog is back in your house. So there is a way in which these animals come back. They can see the neighborhood. They can look at and understand the familiar markings, and they just come back home. But in the case, in what we have noticed was, if they don't find the area, they find the new reintroduced area very strange. In one of the tigers, for example, it was hard release, which means it was brought from a location and just without acclimatizing to the local conditions, it was just allowed to go. And this tiger just started walking, and then as cats do, if this male tiger had it found some female sense, it would have stayed back, but it did not, because there were not many reintroduced tigers then. So it just started walking, and it walked and walked and walked till a point that it thought it was just lost. It could not find its way back, and then it started finding areas that were interesting and started establishing a large home range there and started settling down there. But unfortunately, that was an area filled with local grazers and their cattle, so it had to be brought back. So yes, these animals do disperse far away, but there are ways in which you can make sure that they stay back. Thank you.
Great. So there are lots of questions pouring in. I'll try to cover as many. There's one more from Ayan, which is a similar question that I also had earlier, Shekhar, that what happens when translocation goes wrong? So in India, we are doing a lot of reactive translocation, as we were discussing earlier also, that, you know, there's a conflict animal and then they just react and then move the conflict to another place. So Ayan is pointing out like the tigers that were shifted to Satkosia, and now she's in captivity for almost a year. Can these problem tigers also be relocated? Is it anyway, I mean, is it anyway a good option to translocate them in the first place, or is it better to mitigate the problem at the source?
See, I mean, my personal belief is translocations and relocations are not a quick fix. These are very complicated management tools, and one has to understand that there's a lot of pros and cons to these. I mean, just because you can, because you just know, because you're introduced to a tool, you have these capturing, you're familiar with the drugs, and you have teams who are trained. It doesn't mean that you can just capture animals from A and ship them to B and C, because these animals also, what we understand is, I mean, they also have unique characteristics. For example, if in our landscapes, most of these tigers are cattle eaters. I mean, there's no national park in our country where there are no cattle. I mean, the cattle is everywhere, and those animals which are on the buffer zones and outside are much more dependent on cattle, because this cattle is part of the landscape. So they are used to eating cattle. So when you call it conflict, yes, there is a certain amount of conflict. For example, in Panna, when there is so much of unwanted excess cattle, conflict was mostly wrongly misinterpreted, because there was also a lot of unwanted cattle that was mixed with the cattle which was valuable. But in some places, this may not be the case. In some places, there could be a precious buffalo, which is very important for the local herdsman, and that is killed. Of course, he's very angry with it. So when you try to move mostly to Gujarat and small parts of Rajasthan, in MP, they are more or less they're all extinct. You just don't find them. But in carnivores, what happens is there's never like an extinction. There's always some animals which are moving across the landscape. So there could always be a possibility that an animal or two could move from Gujarat or Rajasthan into Madhya Pradesh. But then this is not a viable population. What I have observed is a lot of these landscapes where these caracals live, caracals prefer these open, arid, semi-arid landscapes and dry deciduous forests. And Panna in these areas are almost the end of the range of the caracal in the world. This is the end of the eastern range. You will not find them further east of the Vindhyas, because the areas get much more greener, and that's the Gangetic delta, and you don't find these animals there. So as such, the animals are lower when they come. They're much the densities are lower when they come to the end of the ranges. At the same time, in the habitat, there's a huge amount of degradation in the sense that the areas where the caracals are found, you don't find many protected areas there, and these areas are mostly grazing areas, and the goat herders and sheep herders who graze there. I mean, there's no control or regulation, or very poorly regulated areas. So what goat herders do is they keep all the vegetation, they lop the trees and keep the trees short. They carry dogs with them. Stray dogs is a big problem there. So if a cat like a caracal is chased, there's no escape cover for these animals from the chasing dogs. So these are these kind of factors which actually decimated this cat in this area. So you don't find the caracals anymore in these places.
Okay, great. And maybe a question for Kartikeya here. There's Anurag who's asking about the importance of lion translocation, and Amar who's asking about the developments. I think Amar, the translocation is still on hold, but maybe Kartikeya, if you can just go ahead and talk about the urgency and the real need.
Yeah, Ali, I think there can't be a better time to explain or emphasize the urgency of lion translocation. You have all seen what a disease can do, and especially given to the fact that we all have lions, all our lions in one single place, and also to the fact that last year we lost lions in Gir due to canine distemper. Definitely, I think it's very urgent and it should be done as early as possible.
Great. So there's still quite a few questions coming in. Let me just see. Yeah, Aditya has a good question here. Uh, so he's talking about leopard translocation in Maharashtra has not turned out to be the best formula, as other leopards take its place or sometimes they come back. What's your opinion on this and what's the best way forward? I think there was a mass translocation which you probably know about, and it failed to quite an extent.
Shekhar, would you like to take that question?
I could not follow
Leopards,
it.
I think it's different.
I could not follow it. Sorry.
So the question is that there was, I think way back in 2001, 2002, there was a mass translocation of leopards in Maharashtra where they moved, because there was conflict, they moved them to area 35, 36, up to 50, 60 kilometers to forest areas, translocated. And in fact, the human conflict became more, the attacks on human became more. Are you aware of that program?
No, I'm personally not aware of it. I mean,
Okay.
I've known many cases where, I mean, it's not only leopards, also snakes are commonly, I mean, if you find poisonous snakes, cobras, etc., so they just dump them in a new location and create new issues in areas because now there are so many new snakes in that area. So, yeah, this is just an unplanned thing, but I'm not aware of this particular leopard concept. But I'm aware of many other, I mean, you don't call them translocations. I mean, just relocations of animals where you just catch them in one place and relocate them to another place.
Okay, great. So also we've got Dr. Raghu Chandawat on this call. He has a question for Shekhar. Raghu, maybe if you want to unmute and just go ahead with your question.
There's a couple of things we're looking at discussions. I think science is very well established. There is enough work. We can't go back to it again and again unless we have some more information. That problem animals relocation is a big nerve. We shouldn't be doing it. We're still continuing to do it, and we should not be even allowing or encouraging it to do it. If we're capturing it, it's like a mortality, and we have to deal with it as a mortality. Um, my question to Shekhar is, generally people think poaching has caused extinction in Panna. And it's not only Panna, and if you look at the last 100 years, it's the trend, it's a pan-India trend that we find it. Their poaching is not happening in Panna, it's happening everywhere. So why some populations are more vulnerable to poaching and some are not? And how are you going to ensure, is there introduction program he's been involved in Panna to see how they can ensure that these introduced population will not be vulnerable to poaching again if radio tracking is stopped after some time?
Raghu, it's a very interesting question. See, there are two things. What I have noticed in Panna is poaching is not the only problem there. There are so many other issues connected with why animals, what may cause a risk to animals, especially, for example, like tigers or leopards. I mean, naturally, these animals live in low densities. There's a lot of local people who use snares and so on and so forth for their pot. So, and this is quite widespread. I mean, I have information from all across Panna and this whole entire area. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who just put electric wires. So there's a lot of non-target species which get killed. For example, you have a small snare for local partridges or something, but a small cat could just get its leg into these traps and then get caught. So there's a lot of non-target animals there. So I'm not only referring to tigers, but there's also a cultural bias to this, which is very complicated and not easy for the management to address these. So starting in 2017, I started a program there in Panna, where subtly we started dealing with local religious leaders, because some of this trapping is also for traditional medicine. So there's a lot of traditional belief that, and then there's a huge market that is supporting these beliefs, which is going on in these areas. So we started a program. When I say we, I along with the forest department and so on and so forth. The forest department was not very open to this idea first, but slowly they fell into place. To involve local religious leaders to communicate some good stories about animals, and slowly finding ways through storytelling to address these cultural issues, especially concerning poaching in these areas. It is not only poaching. There's a lot of disturbance in the non-protected areas. So there are a lot of people, all the den sites, all the caves, areas where animals actually rest are all disturbed. There are a lot of picnics. So even disturbance in the areas outside protected areas is also addressed in this, as part of this program. We had fair amount of success there, but it is a large area and there are a lot of people there. So it is going to be a slow process, but it is something that the civil society has to work parallelly with the government. This is something I don't think the government on their own can do it. It is just beyond their scope. First of all, they don't have a deep understanding of
Shekhar, you're still talking about poaching. I'm saying,
yeah,
if it's wrong to blame entirely on poaching.
Yeah,
and
it is.
But what happens if the radio tracking is stopped? What is the introduction program has put in to ensure that the Panna population doesn't experience the same thing which as it experienced in 2009?
No, I can't. I mean, I can't give you. I can't. I don't know. This. It is. I think the monitoring is something which has to go on for a longer time, because the problems that actually created the extinction, I think they are not really addressed fully. So there's no mitigation of the issues that caused the extinctions. So I think the monitoring has to go on for a very long time. Otherwise, and then of course the areas through which I mean, some of your own work shows how these small populations are vulnerable to extinctions, and then yes, so this particular pocket is vulnerable. And what we also noticed is, until there's a bit of constant monitoring and patrolling, tigers from other areas also don't come into these areas.
If I can come in, Ali, just the last bit of it. See, my worry is that because Panna and Sariska were not a unique events, it was a pan-India event based on our work which we are looking at. And yeah, I think we have to look at very seriously. Poaching is a very simplistic solution. Monitoring is very simplistic solution. We need to do it, but we need to make individual population viable, and we need to find ways to do it.
I totally agree, but the only thing, when you say individual population, you mean the Central Indian, the population within the whole of all the meta populations in Central India? Is that what you're saying, Raghu? Because these populations anywhere are small populations, small numbers of 40 tigers here, 70 tigers in Bandhavgarh, 100 tigers in Kanha. These are all small pockets. Eventually, they have to be connected, and then so there's a lot of work there. On their own,
you can take it up now. It's okay.
So one next question is from Karan. Actually, Karan, you want to unmute your mic and maybe direct your question to either Kartikeya or Shekhar? Karan?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. So, Kartikeya, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Karan.
Yeah, so I basically want to understand, like, for example, obviously we all know that there's elephants been in wild elephants which have come into Bandhavgarh, and there are some now which have come into Kanha. And I want to know what is your take on, what is the right way ahead. Obviously, it would be great to have them in the park, but then is it the locals who have to pay the price for it? Because I think, at least of what I understand, for the last 200 years, probably there have never been wild elephants in central India. So people are not able to have a coexistence with them, because people are managing to live with leopards and tigers. Of course, problems happen, but when we're talking elephants, it's a much larger animal and a very different dynamic. So what do you think is the solution? Is it relocation, domesticating them, or I don't know. So if you can throw some light on that.
Karan, to be very honest, I have absolutely no experience or understanding of elephants. Definitely, relocation or translocation, with little understanding that I have, will not be the answer, especially if they keep coming. And maybe we will have to involve some ecologists or scientists who have experience working with elephants. But yes, if you want to catch them, let me know. I'll figure out a way to catch them.
Sure. No, just because I've been trying to figure out what is the right way ahead and what is, because it seems no state wants to keep these elephants because they were in Orissa. It seems then they got pushed into Chhattisgarh. Now Chhattisgarh they've come into Madhya Pradesh. So God, I mean, really no state really wants to own it up, which is a sad state of affairs.
I don't know. I think Sarath, who's my guru, is also here, and he comes from a state which is the elephant, which has got lots of elephants. So maybe if Sarath is around, he can throw some light on that. But I don't think I have any experience with an elephant understanding.
Sure, thanks.
Sharad, are you there?
Yeah. So, well, some little bit better understanding of elephants from South India. But like Kartikeya and Raghu also mentioned in the chat box that relocating problem animals is no solution. Having said that, it's not so simple on the ground with villagers who are absolutely no memory or experience of dealing with elephants. If they are causing problems, I believe the Bandhavgarh ones were relatively, harmless to the locals. And similarly, the ones in Kana are just two males right now, and they're somewhere in the Kana meadow last seen. So as long as they keep to the park limits, I think they should be left alone. But the complications arise, obviously, when there's some cooperating and some direct human conflict which is happening. And then the difficult decisions have to be taken. Maybe translocation, I'm not sure.
Thanks, Sarath.
Right, thanks, Sharad. So we have time for one last question. Rashid, at the starting of the call, you had a question. Are you still there, Rashid?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm starting with rhinos in Kaziranga, but it applies to tigers and other animals. Kaziranga today has over 2,500 rhinos, whereas the park can only support about 1,600 or so. And that's probably lower now because the grasslands have been reduced for various reasons. So where could we transfer that many? And are those parks ready to absorb this large population? Do they have enough grasslands? Another question on this is, do we have security against poaching in tourist facilities in parks and reserve forests, not in existing national parks, which already have it, and so translocation or relocation is much easier. As existing parks are getting crowded, if we could create new parks, it would be great because there's a lot more interest in tourism than there used to be earlier.
Shekhar, you want to take that question?
I have from a ground perspective, I really have very little understanding of rhinos or the Northeast and the work there. So I don't understand what's the actual context, and I don't understand what is good or bad. But what I can tell you for sure is, in a country like India, and I've also seen these reintroductions and happening in other countries as well. It is not the animals or the ecology that is always given the first preference. Parallelly, you also have this human dimension. For example, these are also very political decisions. When in my experience, when the tigers were being reintroduced into Panna, a lot of people who work there and others as well raised this question: why are tigers being reintroduced into an area when there's already a trouble which actually caused their extinction in the first place? But these questions were not heard because there was the urgency within the government and the politicians to actually, go ahead with the reintroductions. So what I'm trying to emphasize is, these decisions are not always based on logic. These are not always based on animal ecology or the habitat management guidelines, etc. It is a small part of it, but there's also this huge political angle to these reintroductions, not only in India, across the world?
Rashid, this was a brilliant question because it's something which we beginning to struggle now, and in future it will be, because in India we focus so much on our problems that we have actually completely ignored our success stories. The problems, we have not prepared ourselves for our success stories, what to go and what to do next when we have achieved some success in some areas. And Rhino is one of the success program, and if you have rhinos, what to do with those rhinos with success stories. We have not prepared. And in India, there are plenty of examples like this, and something the government has to look into it, how we can take advantage of those success stories. There's plenty can be done. It could be very site specifics, but there could be some general framework can be created. But Rhino is a big example showing how success stories, we are not prepared what to do next.
Anything on the planning of new parks, to expand the area? There's a lot of interest coming into tourism, wildlife tourism. And the crowding of our existing parks is really, I think, going to affect the animal life. What is the plan for setting up new national parks with security, with tourist facilities, so that people actually go, you get more guides, etc., etc.?
Well, Rashid, the thing is, we've been discussing this, and we had a few sessions, discussions recently during this program, but I've been trying quite a lot. The protected area network based, which is a protected area based conservation model, is a very exclusive model. And we can't extend it, infinitely. So we need outside our protected areas a different conservation model, which are parallel, which are inclusive, which includes people and benefit to the people from the conservation model, whether it's tourism or any other ways we can find. We will be a way forward, but it needs a lot of threshing of ideas, innovative ways of looking into how we can bring people on our side of conservation fence to take real advantage of success stories. And
Thanks a lot.
Persuading the people so much, but is persuading our managers and governments.
Thank you, Raghu, for your valuable inputs. I think there's questions pouring in, but we've run out of time. All the people who have questions, please, send it to us maybe on social media or, on email, and we can personally ask the panel and they can get back to you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Kartikeya. Thank you, Shekhar. And thank you, Raghu, and others also for inputs. And next week also we'll be doing a program. We'll communicate that to you soon. Next week our naturalists will be talking about the joy of being a naturalist, and talking about how they got involved in this field. Thank you, and
thank you,
we'll
Raghu,
be in touch.
Sarath, and thank you everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharath, for your inputs as well.
Shekhar, thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, I hope you all enjoyed
Thank
it.
you, Kartikeya. Thank you, Shekhar.
Thank you, Kartikeya.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
guys.
Shekhar.
And Ali, thank you so much for organizing.
Thank you, Alida. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Stay
lot.
safe,
Thanks a lot,
stay
everybody.
healthy.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah, stay safe, everyone. Okay. Bye.
Greetings from Nepal. Bye-bye.
Bye.